guys, it's Willing Away and welcome to another video of Through the Parks. Today we'll be talking about one of the smaller national parks called Congaree, I believe. That name is so hard for me to pronounce. But yeah, so it is relatively small, so we're just gonna hop right into it. It should only take us a couple minutes. This will probably be one of our shorter videos. But yeah, so let's get started with your overall information. So Congaree National Park is located in central South Carolina and contains 26,692 acres and is 18 miles southeast of the state capital, Columbia. The park is home to the largest area of old-growth bottomland hardwood forest in the United States, and the trees that grow there are some of the tallest and form the highest temperate deciduous forest canopies in the world. The park contains the Congaree River, and 15,000 acres are designated as a wilderness area. The park received its designation in 2003 due to the culmination of a ton of grassroots campaigns that had started in 1969. In 2018, however, the park had 145,929 visitors, making it one of the 10th least visited national parks, and it was just behind Nevada's Great Basin National Park. And that is it for overall information. Like I said, this park is relatively small, so there wasn't too much about it. But now I get into the history. There are 3 sections for this history: the pre-park, monument establishment, and conversion to a national park. And we're going to get started with the pre-park section. So, in 1898, the Santee River Cypress Logging Company would begin to center on cypress logging, and it would start operation in the area that is now what we consider the park. They would operate until 1914 and were owned by Francis Beelder and Benjamin F. Ferguson. Beelder and his heirs Beelder and his heirs would retain ownership of the area, however. In the 1950s, someone named Henry R. E. Hampton would become a member of the Cedar Creek Hunt Club and a co-editor of The State. He would then join the Post and Courier and eventually start advocating for the preservation of the Congaree floodplain. Hampton would then form what is called the Beelder Forest Preservation Association in 1961, and due to his advocacy, in 1963, the National Park Service would start a study and would eventually report that it was favorable to set up an establishment of a national monument there. Thus, we get into the monument establishment section. So, in 1969, Beelder would restart logging in the area, which then prompted, in 1972, the formation of the Congaree Swamp National Preserve Association. I'm just going to call them CSNPA. The CSNPA would eventually join forces with other groups such as the Sierra Club and other conservation organizations, and would eventually try to promote federal legislation to preserve the area. South Carolina, Strom Thurmond and Ernest F. Hollings would eventually introduce legislation in 1975 for the establishment of a national preserve. October 18th, 1976, the legislation was passed to help create the Congaree Swamp National Monument, and by 1988, Hollings and Thurmond would eventually introduce a plan to expand this monument by 22,200 acres. And that brings us to the conversion to a national park. So on October 24th, 1988, 2/3 of this monument would eventually be designated a wilderness area and would become an important bird area on July 26, 2001. On November 10th, 2003, Congress would then redesignate the monument as Congaree National Park. During this time of redesignation, they would drop the swamp part out of the name due to its belief that it was misleading, and eventually, at the same time, they would expand the park by 4,576 acres. As of December 31st, however, 2011, 26,021 acres of the park are considered federally owned. And that's it for the history. It was relatively short. There was only a couple sections. And now we're going to get into the environment. So, usually when we get into the environment, it is mostly about the animals that are around the park. Birds, mammals, anything you can think of. Usually it's something about that. But for today's park, we're going to be talking about trees. A lot of trees. So, the park preserves a part of the Middle Atlantic coastal forest ecoregion and is frequently referred to as a swamp. However, it is only ever periodically subject to floods, kind of where the swamp started to become a misleading name. It is designated an old growth forest and is one of the largest concentrations of what is called champion trees, with the tallest known examples of 15 different species. So these champion trees include, we're going to get into a lot of listing, I'm so sorry, 167 foot, 361 point loblolly pine, 157 foot, 384 point sweet gum, 154 foot, 465 point cherry bark oak, 135 feet, 354 point American elm, 133 feet, 356 point swamp chestnut oak, 131 feet, 371 point overcup oak, 127 feet, 219 point common persimmon. And those champion trees just basically say that they are the tallest known examples of their species, and the feet are how tall they are, and I believe the points are like, I guess how many points they have? I'm not a tree expert, but this is what they listed, so I wrote them down because I feel like those are important to understand why these are considered champion trees. But now we get into what animals and other creatures can you find in this park. So in this park, you can find bobcats, deer, feral pigs, feral dogs, coyotes, armadillos, turkeys, and otters. Now the water in the park contains different amphibians, turtles, snakes, many different types of fish. However, some of the most common are your bowfin, alligator gar, and catfish. Now we get into arguably everybody's favorite section. What can you do in the park, your amenities, and your attractions. So this park features primitive campsites. It offers hiking, canoeing, kayaking, and bird watching. However, this park is also very popular for watching fireflies in the summer evenings. Personally, I love watching fireflies. I also love catching them. I remember I had like a jar full of fireflies at one point. Now I don't do that though, because I can't take care of them. Usually I'll catch them, watch them for a little bit, and then let them go. But when I was younger, I had a little container of fireflies. Yeah, they're so fun to catch, and they're also really beautiful to see if you're like if you're in a place away from like where people live, so like out in the country, and you turn all your lights off, you can see a ton of them. Usually if you live where fireflies are frequent, but I can see why it would be popular for firefly watching. Some of your primitive and backcountry camping trails are also available. And some of the hiking trails include your Bluff Trail, which is 0.7 miles long, Weston Lake Loop Trail, 4.6 miles, Oak Ridge Trail, 7.5 miles, and King Snake Trail, 11.1 miles. The National Park Service also displays a current trail condition in the Harry Hampton Visitor Center, and it also has a 20-mile canoe trail on Cedar Creek if you're interested in canoeing. I canoed once. No, I kayaked once. I've never canoed, but I've kayaked once. And if I had to do I kayaked around like a lake once, and I was dead tired. Could you imagine 20 miles? I don't know if a canoe's different, though. Is it easier to canoe? I'll have to look that up. I don't know. However, most of the visitors do spend their time walking along what is called the Boardwalk Loop. This is a elevated 2.4-mile walkway, which goes through the swampy environment. The reason that it is elevated is to help protect the delicate fungi and plant life that is on the ground. That's kind of the main point. Most times, whenever you're walking an elevated walkway, it's usually to protect whatever is on the ground, stuff like that, or to see the views sometimes. I know there's ones where like you can hike through a tree line almost, but those are for views. This one is for protecting. In the visitor center, it also features exhibits about what is considered the natural history of the park, and it also displays the efforts that were used to help protect the park. Monthly volunteers also help lead hikes to offer some longer trails to visitors. This allows them to get off the boardwalk and more closer to nature if you are so feeling it. The climate. What is the climate? So Congaree National Park is classified as a humid subtropical climate. due to, I'm guessing, it being considered a swamp-like, I can definitely see where, like, the humid and subtropical come from. But, however, it's not considered a swamp. They took that out of the name. Still wonder, like, all this is, like, making it sound like a swamp, but I'm guessing it doesn't look like a swamp, and that's the reason they didn't want swamp with the name. I don't know. We'll have to see. Geology. So, it had a lot of specific stuff in geology, like, I mean, really specific. You ever open a book, like a science book or something, and read a paragraph and have no fucking clue what they just told you? That's what happened here. So I took what I knew, and I put it here. There's a lot more specific stuff if you want to go look for it, but I have no clue what that means, so I left it out. I try to make this as understandable as I can get it, and that means if I can't understand it, I don't know if you guys will. So, the park resides entirely within the Congaree River floodplain complex, and it has different flood deposits of sand, silt, and clay. Muck and peat are the products of vegetation decay, and the meander of the river has produced very distinctive oxbow lakes, which I looked at like a little picture of them. Just picture, from what I saw, I could be getting this completely wrong. It's just really big turns in a river. It kind of almost makes, am I thinking this right? The omega symbol, like that big loop where it like cuts in, goes really big like an O, goes out. It kind of looks, it's like that. I don't know how to describe it. It's weird to describe, but I think it's like that. Media. This is the first time I've ran into this, but yes, apparently there was a documentary that came out in 2008 that was made by the South Carolina Educational Television. I didn't watch the documentary, frankly, just because I didn't have the time to. But if you're curious and I guess you want to know more specifically about this national park, if I do find it, I'll probably link the documentary down below in the description. If I don't find it, I'll probably just put away on where you guys can find it if you want to watch it. But that's about it for this park. Like I said, it was relatively short. There's not too much information about this park, but as always, until our next adventure, may your trails be filled with wanderlust, and I will see you guys in the parks. Goodbye!